A tense alliance is playing out in Syria right now. Russia has escalated its attacks, helping Syrian forces launch what they say is a ground offensive against terrorists.
Russia's defense minister says 4 Russian ships fired more than 24 missiles into Syria, hitting 11 targets. But there are conflicting reports as to who those targets are. Holly Williams has the story.
Blasting off from its warships on the Caspian Sea, Russia says its cruise missiles are hitting parts of northern Syria, where both ISIS and al-Qaeda-linked groups have a heavy presence. The Russian President Vladimir Putin said striking targets at a distance of over 900 miles showed the high qualifications of his country's military. More than a week after it began launching airstrikes in Syria, Russia seems to be reasserting itself as a superpower. Protected by Russian air cover, Syrian regime troops pushed into rebel strongholds in the country's northwest. Opposition fighters hit back, including with this missile, which appears to be American-made. But this was the most intense fighting they've seen in months. The US says Moscow's true motive in Syria is to prop up the regime by targeting its opponents, including so-called moderate rebels who are backed by America. The Syrian war has already claimed more than 250,000 lives, many of them killed by the regime's indiscriminate bombing of civilian areas. But Russia has now seized the initiative in Syria, and this coordinated offensive with the regime could be a game changer.
And Holly Williams joins us now. Holly, why are these attacks so significant, and what does this mean for the U.S.?
Well, it's important for 2 reasons. Firstly, Russia's air campaign in Syria gives the Syrian regime an enormous advantage. It gives cover to regime forces as they launch a ground offensive against Syrian opposition forces, some of which are backed by the US. Secondly, this really shows Russia's ambitions to be a bigger player, to better protect its own interests around the world.
You know, the question that keeps coming up over and over again is, who is Russia really targeting? The U.S. really isn't buying that they're targeting strictly ISIS locations.
Well, Russia entered the civil war around a week ago now directly by launching its airstrikes, saying that it was targeting ISIS. But many of the areas that it says that it's hit are not controlled by ISIS. Now, it may be that it's also hitting al-Qaeda-linked groups, but what the US says is that Russia is also targeting American-backed rebels. And that's what we're also hearing from Syrian activists on the ground inside the country.
So given what you just said, Holly, how dangerous potentially is this situation in terms of the possibility of escalating?
Well, it's enormously dangerous for the people of Syria because clearly this conflict is escalating. And remember that more than 250,000 people have died in this civil war already. But it's also dangerous because we now have the US and Russia both carrying out airstrikes inside Syrian airspace, but backing different sides in the Syrian civil war. So that is potentially very, very dangerous.
Thank you, Holly Williams in Istanbul.